Howdy, listening squirrels. Let's read from The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. And we were somewhere in the middle of the chapter. I'm going to go back a little bit. And I'm still harking. The dwarf said never a word, but watched his companion as he paced restlessly up and down the room, and presently returned to his seat. Here he remained, with his head bowed upon his breast for some time. Then suddenly raising it, said, "Once, and once for all, have you brought me any money?" "No," returned Quilp. "Then," said the old man, clenching his hands desperately and looking upwards, "the child and I are lost." "Neighbor," said Quilp, glancing sternly at him and beating his hand twice or thrice upon the table to attract his wandering attention, "let me be plain with you, and play a fairer game than when you held all the cards, and I saw but the backs and nothing more. You have no secret from me now." The old man looked up trembling. "You are surprised," said Quilp. "Well, perhaps that's natural. You have no secret from me now, I say. No, not one. For now I know that all those sums of money, that all those loans, advances, and supplies that you have had from me have found their way to... shall I say the word?" "Aye," replied the old man, "say it if you will." "To the gaming table," rejoined Quilp, "your nightly haunt. This was the precious scheme to make your fortune, was it? This was the secret, a certain source of wealth in which I was to have sunk my money, and in parentheses, if I had been the fool you took me for. This was your inexhaustible mine of gold, your El Dorado, eh?" "Yes," cried the old man, turning upon him with gleaming eyes, "it was, it is, it will be, till I die." "That I should have been blinded," said Quilp, looking contemptuously at him, "by a mere shallow gambler." "I'm no gambler," cried the old man fiercely. "I call heaven to witness that I never played for gain of mine, or love of play, that at every piece I staked I whispered to myself that orphan's name, and called on heaven to bless the venture, which it never did. Whom did it prosper? Who were those with whom I played? Men who lived by plunder, profligacy, I probably screwed that up, and riot, squandering their gold and doing ill and propagating vice and evil. My winnings would have been from them. My winnings would have been bestowed to the last farthing on a young sinless child whose life they would have sweetened and made happy. What would they have contracted? The means of corruption, wretchedness, and misery. Who would not have hoped? Who would not have hoped in such a cause? Tell me that. Who would not have hoped as I did?" "When did you first begin this mad career?" asked Quilp, his taunting inclination subdued for a moment by the old man's grief and wildness. "When did I first begin?" he rejoined, passing his hand across his brow. "When was it that I first began? When should it be? But when I began to think how little I had saved, how long a time it took me to save it all, how short a time I might have at my age to live, and how she would be left to the rough mercies of the world with barely enough to keep her from the sorrows that wait on poverty, then it was that I began to think about it." "After you first came to see me to get your precious grandson packed off to sea?" said Quilp. "Shortly after that," replied the old man. "I thought of it a long time, and had it in my sleep for months. Then I began. I found no pleasure in it. I expected none. What has it ever brought me but anxious days and sleepless nights, but loss of health and peace of mind, and gain of feebleness and sorrow? That's not a question. And sorrow. You lost what money you had laid by first, then came to me, while I thought you were making your fortune, as you said you were. You were making yourself a beggar, eh? Dear me, and so it comes to pass that I hold every security you could scrape together in a bill of sale upon the stock and property, said Quilp, standing up and looking about him as if to assure himself that none of it would be taken away. But did you never win? Never, groaned the old man, never won back my loss. I thought, sneered the dwarf, that if a man played long enough he was sure to win at last, or at worst not to come off a loser. And so he is, cried the old man, suddenly rousing himself from his state of despondency, and lashed into the most violent excitement. So he is. I have felt that from the first. I have always known it. I've seen it. I never felt it half so strongly as I feel it now. Quilp, I have dreamed 3 nights of winning the same large sum. I never could dream that dream before, though I have often tried. Do not desert me. Now I have this chance. I have no resource but you. Give me some help. Let me try this one last hope. The dwarf shrugged his shoulders and shook his head. See, Quilp, good, tender-hearted Quilp, said the old man, drawing some scraps of paper from his pocket with a trembling hand and clasping the dwarf's arm. Only see here, look at these figures, the result of long calculation and painful, hard experience. I must win. I only want a little help once more. A few pounds, but 20 pounds, dear Quilp. The last advance was 70, said the dwarf, and it went in one night. I know it did, answered the old man, but that was the very worst fortune of all. And the time had not come then, Quilp. Consider, the old man cried, trembling so much the while that the papers in his hand fluttered as if they were shaken by the wind. That orphan child, if I were alone, I could die with gladness. Perhaps even anticipate that doom which is dealt out so unequally, coming as it does on the proud and happy in their strength, and shunning the needy and afflicted, and all who court it in their despair. But what have I done? No. But what I have done has been for her. Help me for her sake, I implore you, not for mine, for hers. I'm sorry, I've got an appointment in the city, said Quilp, looking at his watch with perfect self-possession. Or I should have been very glad to have spent half an hour with you while you composed yourself. Very glad. Nay, Quilp, good Quilp, gasped the old man, catching at his skirts. You and I have talked together more than once of her poor mother's story. The fear of her coming to poverty has perhaps been bred in me by that. Do not be hard upon me, but take that into account. You are a great gainer by me. Oh, spare me the money for this one last hope. I couldn't do it, really, said Quilp with an unusual politeness, though I tell you what, and this is a circumstance worth bearing in mind, as showing how the sharpest among us may be taken in sometimes. I was so deceived by the penurious way in which you lived alone with Nellie, all done to save money for tempting fortune and to make her triumph greater, cried the old man. Yes, yes, I understand that now, said Quilp, but I was going to say, I was so deceived by that, your miserly way, the repetition you had among those who knew you of being rich, and your repeated assurances that you would make of my advances treble and quadruple the interest you paid me that I have advanced you even now what you want on your simple note of hand if I hadn't unexpectedly become acquainted with your secret way of life. Who is it? Retorted the old man desperately, that notwithstanding all my caution told you? Come, let me know the name, this person. The crafty dwarf, bethinking himself that his giving up the child would lead to the disclosure of the artifice he had employed, which, as nothing was to be gained by it, it was well to conceal, stopped short in his answer, and said, Now who do you think? It was Kit. It must have been the boy. He played the spy, and you tampered with him, said the old man. How came you to think of him? Said the dwarf in a tone of great commiseration. Yes, it was Kit, poor Kit. So saying, he nodded in a friendly manner and took his leave, stopping when he passed the outer door a little distance and grinning with extraordinary delight. Poor Kit, muttered Quilp. I think it was Kit who said I was an uglier dwarf than could be seen anywhere for a penny, wasn't it? Ha ha, poor Kit. And with that he went his way, still chuckling as he went. And that's the end of chapter 9. So we'll go on to chapter 10. Oh my goodness. So that's where he's been going. I really didn't think about it. Did any of you guess that's where he was going? Gambling? Okay, chapter 10. Daniel Quilp neither entered nor left the old man's house unobserved. In the shadow of an archway nearly opposite, leading to one of many passages which diverged from the main street, there lingered one who, having taken up his position when the twilight first came on, still maintained it was undiminished patience, and leaning against the wall with the manner of a person who had a long time to wait and being well used to it was quite resigned, scarcely changed his attitude for the hour together. This patient lounger attracted little attention from many of those who passed, and bestowed as little upon them. His eyes were constantly directed towards one object, the window at which the chill was accustomed to sit. If he withdrew them for a moment, it was only to glance at a clock in some neighboring shop, and then to strain his sight once more in the old quarter, which increased earnestness and attention. It had been remarked that the personage evinced no weariness in his place of concealment, nor did he, long as his waiting was. But as the time went on, he manifested some anxiety and surprise, glancing at the clock more frequently and at the window less hopefully than before. At length the clock was hidden from his sight by some envious shutters. Then the church steeples proclaimed 11 at night, then the quarter past, and then the conviction seemed to obtrude itself on his mind that it was no use tarrying there any longer. That the conviction was an unwelcome one, and that he was by no means willing to yield to it was apparent from his reluctance to quit the spot, from the tardy steps with which he often left it. Still, looking over his shoulder at the same window, and from the precipitation with which he is often returned, when a fancied noise or the changing and imperfect light induced him to suppose it had been softly raised. At length he gave the matter up as hopeless for that night, and suddenly breaking into a run, as though to force himself away, scampered off at his utmost speed, nor once ventured to look behind him, lest he should be tempted back again, without relaxing his pace or stopping to take his breath. This mysterious individual dashed on through a great many alleys and narrow ways until at length arrived in a square paved court, when he subsided into a walk, and making for a small house from the window of which a light was shining, lifted the latch of the door and passed in. "Bless us!" cried a woman, turning sharply round. "Who's that?" "Oh, it's you, Kit." "Yes, mother, it's me. Why, how tired you look, my dear. Old master ain't gone out tonight," said Kit, and so she hasn't been at the window at all. With which words he sat down by the fire and looked very mournful and discontented. The room in which Kit sat himself down in this condition was an extremely poor and homely place, but with the air of comfort about it, nevertheless, which, or the spot must be a wretched one indeed. Cleanliness and order can always impart in some degree. Late as the Dutch clock showed it to be, the poor woman was still hard at work at an ironing table. A young child lay sleeping in a cradle near the fire, and another, a sturdy boy, with a very tight nightcap on his head and a nightgown, very much too small for him, on his body, was sitting bolt upright in the clothes basket, staring over the rim with his great round eyes, and looking as if he had thoroughly made up his mind never to go to sleep any more, which, as he had already declined to take his natural rest, and had brought out of bed in consequence, opened a cheerful prospect for his relations doggone it. Relations and friends. It was rather a queer-looking family, Kit, his mother, and the children being all strongly alike. Kit was ankle. Funky cold-a-dame was kicking my tail, y'all. But we gonna get it fixed. Oh, I can't wait. Alrighty then. Kit was disposed to be out of temper, as the best of us are too often, but he looked at the youngest child, who was sleeping soundly, and from him to his other brother in the clothes basket, and from him to their mother, who had been at work without complaining since morning, thought it would be a better and kinder thing to be good-humored. So he rocked the cradle with his foot, made a face at the rebel in the clothes basket, which put him in high good humor directly, and stoutly determined stoutly determined to be talkative and make himself agreeable. "Ah, Mother," said Kit, taking out his clasp, C-L-A-S-P, clasp knife, and falling upon a great piece of bread and meat which she had ready for him hours before. "What a one you are! There ain't many such as you, I know." "I hope there are many a great deal better, Kit," said Mrs. Nubbles. "And that there are ought to be, according to what the parson at chapel says. Must he know about it?" Much he knows about it," returned Kit contemptuously. "Wait till he's a widder and works like you do, and gets as little and much as you, and keeps his spirits up the same, and then I'll ask him what it is o'clock, and trust him for being right to half a second." "Well," said Mrs. Nubbles, evading the point, "your beer's down there by the fender, Kit." "I see," replied her son, taking up the porter pot. "My love to you, Mother, and the parson's health too, if you like. I don't bear him any malice." "Not I." "Did you tell me just now that your master hadn't gone out tonight?" inquired Mrs. Nubbles. "Yes," said Kit, "worse luck." "You should say better luck, I think," returned his mother, "because Miss Nellie won't have been left alone." "Ah," said Kit, "I forgot that. I said worse luck because I've been watching ever since 8 o'clock and seen nothing of her." "I wonder what she'd say," cried his mother, stopping in her work and looking around. If she knew that every night, God, eyes are terrible. Every night when she, poor thing, is sitting alone at that window, you're watching in the open street for fear any harm should come to her, and that you never leave the place or come home to your bed, though you're ever so tired, till such time as you think she's safe in hers." "Never mind what she'd say," replied Kit, with something like a blush on his uncouth face. "She'll never know nothing, and consequently she'll never say nothing." Mrs. Nubbles ironed away in silence for a minute or two, and then coming to the fireplace for another iron, glanced stealthily at Kit while she rubbed it on a board and dusted it with a duster, but said nothing until she returned to her table again. When holding the name oh shit, where am I? Name with the dust. When holding the iron, I got name from Melissa. She wrote it on the board and dusted it with a duster, but said nothing until she'd returned to her table again. When holding the iron at an alarming short distance from her cheek to test its temperature, and looking round with a smile, she observed, "I know what some people would say, Kit." "Nonsense," interposed Kit with a perfect apprehension of what was to follow. "No, but they would, indeed. Some people would say that you'd fallen in love with her. I know they would." To this Kit only replied by bashfully bidding his mother get out, and forming sundry strange figures with his legs and arms, accompanied by sympathetic contortions of his face. Not deriving from these means the relief which he sought, he bit off an immense mouthful from the bread and meat, took a quick drink of the porter, by which artificial aids he choked himself and effected a diversion of the subject. "Speaking seriously, though, Kit," said his mother, taking up the theme afresh after a time, "for of course I was only in joke just now. It's very good and thoughtful and like you to do this, and never let anybody know. Though someday I hope she may come to know it, for I'm sure she would be very grateful to you, and feel it very much. It's a cruel thing to keep the dear child shut up there. I don't wonder that the old gentleman wants to keep it from you." And I'm going to have to stop there, guys. I gotta quit waiting so late. I'm going to call in the morning and try to get an eye appointment. I need some new glasses. I've stopped a bit on my red, white, and blue because I'm tired of it. Got so much more to go. Then I got to get on this pocket full of posies. So much to do, yeah. Got to get new batteries for those lights. See y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Love ya. Bye.